I wanted to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Alt21, the foreign exchange and hedging platform that saves you time and money on cross-border transactions. As a CEO, there are days when my calendar feels like a never-ending cascade of decisions, meetings and problems to solve. Days when I can't remember if I've eaten lunch. The last thing I have time to think about is currency exposure. This is where Alt21 can help by taking the complexity out of foreign exchange. With their FX and hedging platform, you can lock in exchange rates and automate payments. And with their low fees, up to 90% less than competitors, you'll save money while freeing up your time for what really matters. If you want to stop juggling and start focusing on growing your business, head to alt21.com. That's alt21.com to find out more. Hello, and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Nurole, the podcast exploring what makes great boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Nurole, board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest, Fiona Hathorn, is CEO and co-founder of Women on Boards UK, now known as WB Directors, established in 2012 to enhance diversity in executive and non-executive leadership. She serves as an advisor to Peel Hunt, a mid-cap stockbroker, and is chair of the nominations committee at Hanks, an FMCG startup. Fiona is a member of the advisory board for the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London and has served on the advisory panel of the Financial Reporting Council. Fiona, a huge welcome and thank you for being here.
I'm delighted to talk to you, particularly as we've just joined forces with Nurole.
Well, that's a great place to start because, Fiona, you have built a wonderful and visionary business and team, together with your co-founders Rachel Tranter and Rowena Ironside, that has helped and inspired thousands of women take on board roles. What has driven you all this time?
Well, in terms of setting up Women on Boards UK as was, and we now call ourselves WB Directors, it was actually when I became an angel investor. Because if I'm honest, I joined the city in 1986, if I dare to say that. And it might sound bonkers being, one of the first female graduates that was taken on by Hill Samuel Asset Management and an extremely dominating sort of male environment. It never occurred to me there weren't any women around. I honestly had never thought about it. And it wasn't until Lord Davis was tasked by the UK government to look at the lack of diversity of women on FTSE 100 boards. I sat in audience and thought, why have I never even noticed or even thought about it? Now, I'm not going to go into a deep sense of self and a discussion as to why that may have been now. But actually, I became an angel investor. So I started investing, a small amount of capital, and I loved going to hear entrepreneurs pitch for capital. And I suddenly realised how hard it was for women in particular to pitch for capital. They weren't being listened to, they were being interrupted, they weren't being discussed after they went out of the room. Now, bear in mind, I'm there with a group of men who I know really well, who have been incredibly inclusive to me. And I sensed that we were discussing some of the male founder-led pitches, even though we didn't think they were investable and didn't particularly like the business model. But sometimes we weren't discussing the women for what reason I didn't understand. So I was brave enough to say, what's going on here? I don't get it. I think she was called Sophie, actually. Sophie was marvellous. I think she got a great business plan. And they just looked at me and laughed and said, Fiona, darling. And they genuinely said that. Said, I don't think you get it. She might have a baby. She's not having our cash. End of. And it was one of those jaw-dropping moments. And that situation, combined with the whole FTSE 100 movement, made me realise there was an issue. And so I started doing a bit of research. And then serendipity plays a bit of a part in life. I went to a Mercer's conference on Women on Boards. No idea why I was there. I can't even remember what happened. And on the panel was Claire Braund, the founder of Women on Boards in Australia. And she said something that completely blew the panel away. So we had the great and the good talking about the lack of women on FTSE 100 boards, all giving their views. And the audience was sitting there nodding away, and it was all fine, but a bit boring. And Claire just suddenly stood up on the panel. She was invited to speak, and she said, well, that's very interesting. She looked at the panel. And she said, you lot have just put that lot, which was the audience, off. Unintentionally, you've just told them all they're not good enough to sit on FTSE 100 boards. Well, quite frankly, that is not good enough. And the whole audience laughed. And I'm thinking, how rude, very important people on this panel, and they won't be happy. And so I was brave enough to go up to her afterwards and say, what brilliant. And she told me about, it's not all about FTSE boards. You need to think about community boards, society boards. There's many boardrooms out there. It's not just the listed sector. And you need to hold people's hands and support them. And I went, great idea. And she just said, well, are you going to do it then? no, not setting up a women's network. But actually, what she said really planted an idea in my mind. And I thought, actually, this is very much needed. You've recently done a podcast, I think, a while back with Helena Morrissey, the 30% Club. There were many movements, but there wasn't anything really grassroots and supportive for individuals. And so I did get off my backside and I did do it. But that was the roots of the vision. It wasn't intentional, it just sort of happened. But that's life sometimes.
Tell us about someone whose journey really captures the impact you set out to make.
Well, as you know, that's an impossible thing for me, Ollie, and that's because we have about 3,500, 4,000 success stories, and they're the ones that we know about. We've been going for about 15 years now. But there is one in particular that always comes to mind. And actually, she was on LinkedIn today. She's just got another job. It was a lady called Tracy Watkinson. And we met Tracy at a UBS workshop. So we've worked with UBS ever since we started. They're one of our foundation supporters. And we ran a workshop on 7 reasons why being on a board is good for you, your company and society, and active career management and owning it. And Tracy must have been in the audience. I don't particularly remember that. And she'd just come back from maternity leave. And I don't know if she's got twins or had 2, but they were quite young. And she came to a workshop, and she'd never thought about going on a board as a career development strategy. And she said to me later, because, obviously I've met her several times since, that she was worried that at work people were overlooking her because she just had children. And she thought, you know what, I'm going to do something noticeable. She'd not thought about going on a board. Anyway, you have to be brave enough to apply. And we went through the role of the board and how to apply for a board. And she applied for Volleyball England. And she rang us up, and I do remember this. She rang us up and said, oh my gosh, I've actually got an interview and I'm completely petrified. And we said, well, what are you worried about? And I said, don't worry about that. One of our members is actually the chair of Volleyball England, and another member is the CEO of Volleyball. We'll get them to have a chat with you. Anyway, she got it. And she's gone on from that. I don't think she realised how good she was. And she really used that. And she then went on the board of British Handball Association. Then she went and chaired England Handball. And then from that, she moved from UBS. She moved to NatWest, eventually became a global COO. And she's not on the finance side. She was on the project management side. And then she was aware of subsidiary boards within NatWest. So she put her hand up. Obviously, that CV that she had, and she's actually just joined, I think it's the board of, she's just joined as a CEO of Kennedy's. So she's used being on community boards to actively champion who she is. She knows about governance. And we did a podcast with her. We've got our own podcast stream, as you know, and she calls it an intelligent hobby. And to me, that is an absolute case study of more than 12 years of watching somebody use it. It's brilliant. I'm really impressed by Tracy, and I would like to plant more of those seeds with Nurole now.
One of the things that you and the WB team have built that I absolutely love is your offering for large corporates, which helps them develop their executives. I'm interested to hear why you think those executives keep coming back to this, and particularly those who didn't even think board roles were for them.
I think, I've just talked about mentioning C-suite -1, 2 and 3, and planting those seeds. When I'm doing a talk on the career benefits for you as a company by allowing your employees to go on a community board as career development strategy, or society, or the individual themselves, giving them more purpose and making them more aware of their value add, because you don't know. I view it as planting seeds. So I always say, I've got a packet of seeds here and I'm just throwing them around the room. Some of them will germinate today, some will germinate next week. So one of the things that I think that makes a difference is still today, executives are blown away by the idea of going on a board, and you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know it's an option to go on a football club board, a local library board, you might have heard of a school governing board, that may or may not be your thing, but that you can do it alongside your day job, and demystifying the boardroom is important. That's one thing. I think the other thing that makes a big difference is we are not trainers, we're leaders in our own right. We're demystifying things and we're actually keeping them simple, but we don't do fluffy stuff. We don't talk about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome exists, but it's a way to always hold people back. So we don't want to talk about that. We know that. We want to give people nuggets of knowledge that will allow them to do something differently tomorrow. And it germinates at different times. So the longevity of why people come back is that we give anybody that we meet with the email address of the company that they've got. So I mentioned PwC already, they're one of our founding partners. Anybody with PwC email address gets free access to our vacancy board, our how to write a CV, events that are demystify things, not sort of high level events, the same thing as I've discussed before, but we hold their hand at the point of interview. So it's that trust, and that's a safe place to go. We also give direct feedback. So where you planted a seed, because I would say that when we meet 40 people, it might be a workshop on boards, it might be a workshop on active career development, it might be a workshop on network. I don't really care what it is. It's what problem you're trying to fix. We've got several different things that we can do there. That seed's planted. For about 10% of the room, that seed will germinate that afternoon, and they're on it. Tracy Watkins on it. Next day, on our vacancy board, checking what could she apply for. For about 30%, they're really quite intrigued, but it's not for them right now for a whole host of reasons. But we meet people that pop up 5 years ago, and they come to an event and they go, I'm ready now. Thank you. And the feeling you get from that, and I think that's why people come back. And we usually go in because they specifically are interested in the board. They know about the board stuff. They don't know about the career stuff that we do. And I think the main reason we started developing career stuff, our Steps for Success series, is a toolkit on influence. What do you know about the person you influence? Fill this form in. What do you know about yourself? Where are the gaps? So that they can use the toolkit the very next day. Only came to us because a few of our corporates said, well, to be honest, for that group, we've already done that workshop. But we want to maintain our membership. What else can you do? But I think that's why we get the stickability. It's that safe place, honesty, and the reassurance we give people to take stretch positions, whether it's stretch in the boardroom or stretch as an executive. Because the reality is most people learn on the job. They haven't done an MBA. And if we only give people the opportunity who've done it before, good luck with that project.
Can you bring that to life maybe by walking through a before and after of a company that have used the executive programme to affect change?
A couple of companies I know I can mention their name because they let us do, but we're working with one FTSE 30 at the moment, where we're working on succession planning for their CEO. Now, we're not doing the whole succession planning, they're doing that in-house. And it's only 12 execs on that programme, and mostly they're bringing them together and, they might bring somebody in from, INSEAD, they might be doing something on financial planning or strategy and that sort of thing. But they bring us in just to look at the boardroom. Because top executives who may be head of the US for this particular company, they're almost like a subsidiary board. So they're not part of the main board, but they actually are a registered board director. Some of them don't quite realise it. They do, but they think they've got a comfort blanket. So we actually talk to them about reporting into a board minutes. We introduce them to other board directors. So that's one thing that we do. PwC we've been involved with for a long time. They've got retiring partners. We can support those. They've got pathway to partnership programs. They've actually got people on the pathway track. So there's many levels that you can move in on. And so what we're doing is supporting people to say, do you know what? Up to you to manage your career. Don't wait for your line manager. 3 crucial things that you need to do if you're ambitious, and it's choice. One is championing achievements. Does anybody know really what differentiates you? And it's a small little campaign ever since. It's not about shouting and being loud today. It might have been years ago. There's still a few of those around. It's about how do you influence, who are you influencing? And we also talk about meeting management and then considering a board role as a career development strategy. And we've got a super example of a lady called Avni Masharin, who was at PwC, now a partner. And she never thought about going on a board. And she realised it was a career differentiator in her partnership interview. Because when you get to partner, lots of people want, it's not for everyone, but want to be a part. You have to produce a business plan. And that's tough. But if you've got hundreds of people going up or 30 positions, how do you choose? If one is a leader in the community on a board, and in her case, she was on the Girls' Day School Trust, she's got something different to talk about. If you take the other woman I'm thinking of is Karen Finlayson. She was a partner in Leeds Bradford. She eventually went on the supervisory board, going on Doncaster College's board and Leeds Teaching Hospital board, and all of those got her noticed. in London. So for me, those are the sorts of things that we do. I can give you countless examples of the corporates bring us in for different reasons. But crucially, it's to fix a specific problem, but to look after and inspire. Actually, I will give you one more story. JP Morgan brought us in because they wanted to lend their talent to the community around Canary Wharf. They do the same thing in Bournemouth and all of their offices now. They realise that their employees need purpose, and they also realise, I joined the city in the 1980s. It was really the 1990s when things were going gangbusters. So I think Morgan Stanley was called Chemical Bank, and only had 50 employees. Goldman Sachs wasn't much different. So there's always a growth opportunity. Now in these big companies, certainly in the global environment today, there isn't a growth opportunity. But actually people are quite happy in their job. They might be earning a reasonable salary, but they're not stretching themselves. So JP Morgan also used that to give that gift to their employees. And I think that's a really fantastic thing for them to do.
What's the biggest misconception you face amongst CHROs and CEOs navigating this path?
When we're talking to a corporate about whether they should encourage their employees to go onto board, one of the things, if you meet somebody, a CEO or a CPO who's sitting on a community board, because you mustn't have a conflict of interest, and it's difficult to go unlisted if you are in a big commercial environment, just giving it the time and the bandwidth if anything goes wrong. So I get that. If they've not sat on a board, they've no idea what you're talking about. So you've got to hurdle. And then they'll say, our executives don't have time. And my choice to that is, what do you think we're talking about? I'm not talking about an NHS board. I'm not talking about a FTSE board. I'm talking about your local library that only meets 4 times a week. And actually life is about choices. Life's about options. And if you've got time to run a marathon, that's your choice. But if you don't know, you don't know. And not only will it make your executives more aware of risk, finance and governance, they'll have a better understanding. It's that free training course. But the biggest objection that we get is our executives don't have time, you don't understand. Actually, I think they don't understand. Or they're too junior. No, they won't be interested, they're too junior. That's like hiding the toys under the table and not sharing. And in my case, you're never too young to be on a board. You're never too old to be on a board, as long as you understand your duties, responsibilities and liabilities. And if you listen to many of your podcasts, Ollie, it's about the dynamics of the boardroom. Most people learn on the job. It's not difficult. What's difficult is people. So there's lots of things and understanding how to sell yourself, but that's the biggest objection that we get.
Board conversations are changing fast. AI, geopolitics, climate, cyber. If you've ever felt slightly behind these topics, Nurole Plus gives you personal expert support and tailored content to stay credible, contribute confidently, and open doors to more ambitious board opportunities. Visit plus.nurole.com to learn more. So, as part of the Director Circle offering, you've hosted a lot of events and talks with many leading non-executives. What are the common threads you see in the best of them?
Well, the Director Circle group we set up to support established board directors. When we first started, established board directors were supporting us. But those individuals that they were supporting years ago are now established board directors. Some of them are SIDs, senior independent directors, some are chairs, or some are sitting on complex boards. And there wasn't a community of trust for them. And it might sound odd, but if you're on a board and Financial Services Board and you get a Section 166 letter from the Financial Conduct Authority, it's quite stressful. And if you think there's an issue in the company, it could be on their balance sheet, it could be a whistleblowing. It's quite a lonely place, because when you sit in a board, you are there as individuals. You're collectively responsible, but you're personally liable if something goes wrong. And if you get a sense that this isn't going quite right. So we set up this to do 12 events a year, and we've actually got subgroups now to talk about. We had one very recently, which is quite interesting, on what happens when it all goes wrong. So it was one individual taking a listed company into, it went into liquidation, delisting, and they were just talking about what it was like to be lonely, how frightened they were, but they were honestly sharing the feeling. And there were quite a few silent board directors. Interesting enough, most of our events, this one was on Zoom, people show themselves up, you see the names, and actually there's quite a few which they didn't. And I actually got emails from a couple of them afterwards, and they didn't want you to know, and they just said, thank you. I thought it was just me that was that scared. And these were really pocket rocket amazing board directors. So I think that's what we've created. I think one of the things, so people want a safe place. And actually, I remember Sir Roger Carr telling me a long time ago, there was a gang of them all on financial services or defence, said that they had that safe place. Now there's lots of big events that you think you'd find a safe place. It's harder, so we try and structure something. I think the one thing that comes across more than anything else is we want to talk about culture. What do we do when we don't think our board is treating it seriously? Yeah, we see the gender pay gap. Yeah, we see their data. Yeah, we hear about they're doing this and doing that. We've heard about their employee representative groups. We've heard about it all, but we just don't feel it's going well. And, we would like to kick the tires a little bit more, and we're just getting pushback. So there could be being interrupted. We've had bullying issues in the boardroom that we dealt with where people are, a non-executive director of a commercial company doesn't want to say, I feel bullied in the boardroom, I feel interrupted, but they will come to us and share. So I think we all need that support group, and I think that's what the DC group achieves.
So interesting. That's been a recurring theme across Enter the Boardroom. I think Jerry Brown talked about that in episode 103 as being the single biggest contributor of major board blow-ups. And then also Baroness Dambisa Moyo in episode 64 talked about the idea of having a culture committee, that this is something that is so important. Why do we not have a dedicated committee to it? So it's really interesting to hear that that's coming up as a recurring theme amongst your director circle members.
Yeah, and one of the things you would add to that, we did some research on how many CPOs are in the boardroom. Either they're NEDs who've been a CPO. There isn't the expertise in the boardroom of leadership development and culture in general. And just because you're a woman or a minority man or a man that's got daughters, don't you know, doesn't mean to say that you really, really get the ability to change the culture in a complex organisation that has multiple sites globally, because at the end of the day, it's about behaviour. And actually, if you want to do behaviour, we briefly mentioned unconscious bias training. Who on earth thought, I was told 15 years ago by the lady who designed some of our courses, we already know that unconscious bias changing doesn't work. It's a mere blip in explaining something. Do we really think a 20-minute video is going to change your life? Decades worth of deeply unconscious stuff. So what a waste of time. But actually, if you want to change an organisation where you think it's going wrong, you actually have to sit down with the leaders in quite small groups and build it up over time. Doesn't happen quickly. And I think that is a big issue still.
Interesting. My hypothesis for that is that many boards think they have CEOs on their board who have been responsible for the overall culture, and that's why they don't recognise the additional value of someone who's come up the CPO route. And I had an experience recently where we had a board member who was from a sort of CPO background, and it was incredible how they unlocked this particular talent issue because of their depth of experience, which really highlighted for me the value of having that depth of experience that most CEOs probably wouldn't have unless they'd come up that CPO route. What's your take for why we don't have greater recognition?
If you can have as many people in the boardroom or senior executives or CPOs in the company or ED&I who know what they're doing, but if the CEO doesn't support properly and behind the scenes, it will fail whatever they're doing. So you do need the CEO to be the ultimate responsibility for it. And you do need the CEO to be driving the divisional heads and checking up and supporting any work that you're doing. It's crucial. But they have to be that type of leader to start with. And I think the challenge from the execs that we're talking about is when you know they're not like that. And I would also point out, go back to a couple of the podcasts that you did. It was the Jackson, was it Tim Jackson, or you've done, we're talking about growth and turnaround. There's a timing for this. Given this change takes 5 years, it doesn't happen in a big company very, very quickly unless you change the CEO. There will be a timing that you have to concentrate on profits or a financing or mergers and acquisitions. So the bandwidth is tight. But my issue in terms of, do you have a culture of learning and development or a culture of changing in behaviours? All of these things are interrelated. That's what really matters, and it takes time. And lots of NEDs feel it's not happening and they don't quite know what to do. But you do need the buy-in of the CEO, but the CEO can't really lead it because they've got multiple things. They can't do everything. They need a team that they trust.
Let's talk about getting non-executive board roles. I've spoken with so many people that you have helped on their board journey. Curious to hear, what are the ways you think most help people starting out on their board journey?
So in terms of what really helps, I think the first thing is you've got to know about the opportunity of going on a board. And then once you've decided that you know about it, Tracy Watkins is an example of that. And in fact, interesting, you did a really interesting podcast with Laurie Benson, who's a member that we've known for a long time, and we helped her. So she knew she wanted to do it. I don't know that we inspired her to do that, but we did do that. Then she came to one of our events. Then it's about understanding the value you bring to the board. And there is the biggest challenge. And once you understand your value, then have to write it down in a CV. And you actually have to run a little mini campaign and tell people you're interested in boardrooms. And I think the one thing that people miss out is the why. Why do you want to do it? Because boards don't want board directors for the sake of board directors. They want to know your passion and whether you understand their business model. And then they want to know whether you fit in terms of what their needs are in terms of that deep T, that skill, that technical skill. And operating as a board director, skill is only about 25% of it. The next is the process of the decision making and how you can contribute and whether you can share that. Then you've got to think about your style. Are you independent? How do you make decisions? How do you influence? Because you can't do everything in that board meeting. Sometimes it takes time. And then there's your business acumen in general. So that's the thinking style and what you've got. So it's deeply complex. So I think the main thing in terms of how do you help people starting out is really helping them understand their value and also not taking rejection too seriously. Because I've been binging on your podcast, I've also been binging on the WB Directors podcast because we've got so many of them. I wanted to sort of compare and contrast. And we've actually got a podcast on people talking about all their rejections. And somebody's gone through all the podcasts and put them all together. And then there's 15 of them all going from one direction after another. And I think you need a lot of resilience and support. And I think that's the other thing that we bring. But yes, writing that takes time. And a lot of people think, oh, I can use AI to write a boardroom. I've got a friend and I'm just going to copy their CV. You actually need to do a deep amount of thinking about what you're proud of that you've done in your life, your career life, which can be quite long. And then you've got to write down what you did, what was the business benefit and what was the outcome. And then next to that word, you said that was strategy, that was change, that was influence, that was M&A, that was this. And then if you've got all of these little stories and these things, you can think, okay, so what story am I going to say is my skill? Because you can't say, I am everything. I mean, you might be if you've been a CEO and you've sat on loads of boards, you might be able to do that. But if you're starting out, you can't say, oh, I'm going to be marvellous. I mean, get real. Give people a story. So I think that's the main thing.
And what about the most common mistakes you see people make when going for their first role?
The most common mistake going for their first role, I think it would probably be not practicing their answers to their questions, because we do something which is, and I hate this word, your elevator pitch. When somebody says, could you tell us how you'd add value to the boardroom and your understanding of the boardroom, brevity is key at that stage. Less is more. And if you've not done it before, you're likely to over-answer that question and kitchen sink it. And actually, by the time you've got to the interview, you're already good enough because you've got whatever they think they want or somebody's recommended you, which is fine. But it's our personality contest. And it's our personality contest. Do I like you? Do you play golf? Well, it shouldn't be now. It's actually saying, could I imagine this person in the boardroom and their style of speaking? And if you talk too much, they're thinking, oh my gosh, can you imagine them in the boardroom? Go on and on and on and on and on, dotting every I, crossing every T. Or you prove that you've been on a corporate governance course and you start talking about governance too much to prove that you do know about governance, at which point you think, we've got a company secretary that does that. What is this person? So less is more. So I think that's the commonest mistake.
One of the challenges we see many people wrestling with is that transition from they've got their first pro bono role and they want to get their first paid role. If you had to pick 3 pieces of advice to give someone in that situation, what would they be?
I think the first thing I would say is don't tell people, oh, it's only a pro bono role, it's not a paid role. It's the duties, responsibilities and liabilities the same. It's your business whether it's paid or not. So I think how you frame it is really, really important, because the minute you start framing it, well, I haven't really had a board role, I've only just. It was only a small thing. And actually you have to say, what's your definition of small? So I think that's important. I think that a lot of people say, and a few headhunters would say this, I don't think Nurole, well, I know Nurole don't say this, but it's not the same. It's a waste of time. Just go for paid roles. You take somebody like Sophie O'Connor, who came to one of our workshops years ago. She first went on to Housing Association, which was bigger than a FTSE 250 company. So she learned a lot. She went on the Coal Miners Pension Fund board. She went on a cricket board, a sports board. She really honed understanding her value add. And that gave her more credibility when she applied for the Bank of New York Mellon International Subsidiary Board, which then resulted in her chairing Scottish Widows later on. That's a Lloyd's subsidiary board. Now she's on a FTSE 250. That was like a 15-year strategy. Now, if you speak to Sophie, she laughs actually because it wasn't a strategy, it doesn't let it happen. But actually, she got frustrated at not getting those roles. But those pro bono roles were incredibly significant. And if you think about strategically, not only do you obviously need to care about the organisation, otherwise you won't be a good NED, but I think strategically about who am I sitting next to? You mustn't say going into, I might learn something. You're not there to learn anything, you're there to give something. But what you will learn something from the wisdom and experience of other people. And to me, they're going to be your referees, they're going to be your connections. So I don't think it is tough. But those that, Francesca Escari is, one of our members, she's a very established board member. She waxes lyrical on getting rejections and not being taken seriously and really gets frustrated. But she took that, turned it positively and worked on her campaign. She took speaking opportunities. She said, I'm looking for a new role. She gave her elevator. She had these subtle, subliminal things going on in her LinkedIn profile. But the campaign was really serious. And so struggling, I know it's difficult, but we all get rejections, and I would recommend that people listen to the podcast that we've got on all the rejections, because it's not just you. Please don't take it personally, and we'll happily give you a telephone hug. And I know Nurole now offer hugs, telephone hugs on rejections as well, because it is frustrating and you want to give up. But if you do give up, again, you're letting the ones that have the privileged, you're leaving the nutters in charge again. I don't mean nutters, but you know what I mean.
Fiona, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a short question and ask you for a quick response if you're ready. Best book every board member should read, and why?
There's a book called Board Talk, and it's by Gillian Cam and Catherine Bishop. And it's about the crucial conversations that boardrooms should be having inside and outside the boardroom. And we actually did a little Director Circle event on this, and she talks about, because she gives you examples of questions and case studies, but her best thing is the rat dead? Do actually all the board know that the company is dead or the company is dying, but not actually admitting it or saying it, but they're all doing dissections and analysis, but actually is somebody going to say the rat's dead? But it's just a really good book about insights and issues and questions that you could have come up with at that time. It's brilliant.
Boardroom behaviour that irritates you most?
Anybody who joins a board with a poor understanding of the business model.
Most valuable board ritual?
I learnt this by talking to one of the professors at INSEAD on boards. It's ending board meetings by saying, what went well today and what did not?
Favourite quote?
I decided to look up where this quote came from, and I couldn't believe it. It actually was the shampoo advert that I remember seeing it from. Don't let labels hold you back. Be strong and shine. And it was a shampoo advert coming out of the Philippines, which showed you a woman talking at a lecture theatre, or a woman talking in a meeting, a man talking, and the judgmental nature of things. And to me, given the fact that I didn't let labels hold me back, I didn't even have a labels or aware of them, and my father and my mother are a big part of that. That advert came out around the same time that I was doing the angel investment and everything, and I was just blown away from the flipping obvious going on around with me. So for me, that quote still shines.
Most significant professional insight?
There's lots of conversations about you need a mentor, you need a coach, you need this, you need that. Not all of us can afford that. And I'm not saying it's not worth it, but I think you have to be your own mentor and drive your career with purpose.
Worst professional advice you've ever received?
It was one of the chairs of HSBC. Now, there have been many chairs in my 40-year career, so I'm not going to name him. And I was one of the largest investors in HSBC because I was an Asian fund manager. And I was at a dinner with a stockbroker, with him and several other stockbrokers. And because I was the most important investor at the time, I was sat next to this chap. And he told me that I should stay at home and that I was ruining HSBC's graduate and leadership business module, because they used to recruit people and then they'd send them all over the world and their wives would come with them. And now, because of professional women like me, so that was my worst professional advice, was to go back home. And I'll never forget it, because the stockbroker with me literally spat his food out, thinking, oh no. Now, fortunately, I'm quite resilient, so I enjoyed that conversation enormously, and I will never forget it. And his picture's still in HSBC's building, as all the previous chairs are. And I did once at a workshop looking at him, what's running a workshop on empowerment, and it was one of the perverse, oddest moments in the last 10 years, because I remember what he said to me a long time ago. It's brilliant.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
The thing there is size of boards, because we all talk about we need a CTO on a board, we need a chief people officer on a board, we need an ethnic minority on board, we need a woman on the board, disability on boards, all of this, we do need all of these voices. But the research is very clear, the size of the board really matters, and if it gets too big and unwieldy. So for me, make the committees do the harder work, and I'm a huge fan of shadow boards and advisory boards and tossing ideas in. And I know Nurole have got pop-up boards and things. I think you can get a lot of the thought. The employees on boards is quite interesting. I could wax lyrical on that, which I think is a great idea. But there's many ways you can get the employee voice there, or the customer voice, but you can't have all of these people in the boardroom. So that would be be careful on the size of the boards. Be careful what you wish for.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, apart from your 3 a.m. email? And what did you learn?
Trust your judgment. I was unlucky enough to be on the board of the Thai Euro Fund when the 1997 financial Asian crisis happened. And there was a rumour that lots of the investment trusts in Asia had Thai bills of exchange. And these were like cash vehicles that you got a bit of higher return on, and you could trade them. And I asked the question, because I was the fund manager, really. I wasn't managing the money. The money was being managed in Thailand when there was a foreign investment. Did we have any bills of exchange? And they said no. And I believed them. And it was only about 3 or 4 weeks later, when lots of announcements were happening from all the other exchanges, I thought, how could we be the only one that doesn't have them? And some of them are still being managed by the same company. So I asked my CEO if I could get on a plane and go to Thailand and meet them. And I knew that some of the fund managers really well, and I asked them again. And I actually had the valuation in front of me. I couldn't see it because they were labelled in a funny way. And she said no, but she just hid her face. And I went, thank you very much. I knew. And that's it. And I just remember it was a good judgment to get on the plane, but I was 3 weeks behind everyone else. So, I wasn't asleep on the job, but I should have got on that plane straight away, because...
Power of being in person.
Yeah.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
I think for me, it's the wisdom of, I have a sense of urgency and I'm a bit of a doer. I'm much more aware that I'm not there to do things. I'm there to support, engage, advise. And therefore, for me to get it right, I have to be on the right board. Knowing that I like smaller companies, knowing I'm a bit of a change agent, I think the fit has to be right. And one of the things I would say, and we say in all our workshops, is if you're asked to join a board, don't be grateful. And in fact, Tamara Box said one yours, was she asked to join the Bastardy Cats and Dogs Home or something? It was a dog charity. And she went home and her husband, she was, very excited by this. And her husband said, you don't even like dogs. And I thought it was hilarious because it's a perfect example of don't be grateful. So I think you have to I've learned that. I think I would have been grateful and just done things because it's a status thing and it's not good for anyone.
And finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode if they take nothing else.
I would say do me personally a favour and spread those seeds about the career benefits of being on a board. And that's the first thing. So tell everyone, including your children and nieces, nephews, anybody you meet, because I think it's a game change, even university boards for young people. My second thing would be make understanding the boardroom part of career development, because the earlier you get an insight in those learnings, the better you're going to be as a C-suite executive. And open up your own boardroom and advertise your roles and stop behaving so secretly, because it is challenging to advertise your roles transparently, but you will get a better candidate and you'll be catching from a wider net.
That has been an inspiring story. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience.
You're very welcome, and I look forward to our joining forces and great things to come, I hope.
Well, I'm really excited too. There's a huge opportunity. If you want to stay ahead of fast-moving board conversations, with expert support guiding your development, Nurole Plus can help. As a listener, you get 10% off. Head to plus.nurole.com and use the code ENTER at checkout.